Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Stands Newtown Theatre here at the Edinburgh Fringe 2023. Make some noise for yourselves. And make some noise for Darren McGarvey. Alright troops, how's it going? I'm just trying to take a temperature check here just to see what level of rowdiness we've got. It gets a bit rowdier as the week goes on, but you can never tell at the Fringe. I was here last year as well, which was obviously the first time that the Fringe had been on since lockdown. So, you know, it was amazing for me, an amazing privilege to be here, you know, watching our famous capital city get back on its own 2 feet. Thanks to the temporary migration of hundreds of talented Glaswegians who migrated here for the month to provide Edinburgh with some culture. I've got an amazing couple of guests on for you this evening, but I think I'll just take 5 or so minutes just to kind of warm you guys up a wee bit with some material. So I know there's a lot of talk just now at the Fringe. It's a bit of a culture war, lightning rod. This is an era, I would say, characterised more than anything by division, tribal disagreement. Nerves are shot, tempers are flaring. But I'm sure there is one thing that everyone in this room can agree on. Meeting Liz Truss really took it out the Queen. Do you remember Liz Truss? Do you remember when Liz Truss used to look down the lens of a camera and reassure us all that with her what you see is what you get? Not knowing that that was the first time in history that a politician had both accurately and concisely described the true nature of a problem. Aye, it's mad to think where we even went down the Liz Truss route, isn't it? Really? So the theme of the event this evening obviously is an emphasis on writing and also trying to kind of create a bit of a dichotomy between writers of different generations, because the whole industry that has grown up around writing and your thirst for writing has changed. It's gone through a couple of revolutions and it's about to go through another one with the onset of artificial intelligence. But the most interesting thing I can say about writing, to be honest, is to sort of elaborate a wee bit on my experience of writing my second book. You see, the thesis of that book, The Social Distance Between Us, was this idea of proximity. This idea, how can people who have only known power, wealth and privilege always end up in charge of a country where most people will never see that kind of power, wealth and privilege? And why haven't we started to zero in on the fact that that might be part of the fucking problem in this country? Of course, the great irony for me when I was trying to come up with this grandiose thesis was that as a result of lockdown, I was plunged into closer proximity to my wife and children than is either normal or fucking tolerable. You guys all remember lockdown, don't you? I don't know what your pre-lockdown experience was. Mine was I was in rehab for a month, exhausted and burnt out, looking for all your fucking validation, trying to second guess. What does we 2.5 saltire on Twitter want me to say and do today? Turns out that actually makes you quite sick. So I was in rehab, I got detoxed, I came out, it was Christmas. I got out of Christmas. Then it was January. And I got a wee phone call for HMRC to January just to let me know, actually, I wasn't wealthy, I was a fucking idiot. One financial mistake away from a rather humiliating and inconvenient return to poverty. And after that humbling experience, I celebrated with a very expensive wedding. So that was my pre-lockdown experience. So lockdown for me was like marriage, family, recovery boot camp. And I remember in lockdown, about 2 weeks in, when there was still a bit of a novelty about it, if you had a garden and a couple of tellies, and the sun was beating down, you get the PS4 dusted off and fired up. My darling new wife at the time, she's still my wife, by the way, she turns to me and she says, Darren, love in her eyes. If we can get through this, we can get through anything. And I says, do you know what? You're right, Becky. But also, I'm starting to notice some things about the way you breathe. So now that I feel that you're sufficiently warmed up, I'm going to introduce the guests. I'll spare your time and my own time. And I'll spare the long preamble. The first guest is Irvine Welsh. Welcome, mate. And my second guest, this is a special one for me, given that it is my own show and that I'm actually in charge of it, which is a novelty that is not going to fucking wear off, let me tell you. Then I can just pick whoever the fuck I want, you know what I mean? And there was someone back in my past who really, really helped me when I needed it, and she might not even remember how much she helped me, but I always thought, if I'm ever in a position to return the favour, I'm going to do it. And then the opportunity came. So back, a few years back, when I was running for the DWP, I decided I had to sign up to any course that would have me in college, and it happened to be a journalism course, and that's where I met the next guest, Kat Cochrane. Me and her were a wee bit longer in the tooth than some of the young pups straight out of school into college. And so I think we had a connection on that basis. But I remember when we just got there, she produced this portfolio. She'd already created loads of work. It was really well organised. It was really well formatted. And I thought, fucking hell, man. She knows what the fuck she's doing. I better stick close to her. And then a couple of years later, when I was a bawhead away for failing the course, it was really her help and patience that got me through the final furlong and qualified as a journalist. But she is also an amazing, talented, insightful, hilarious writer in her own right. She's a poet. She's a non-fiction writer and also a very good fucking journalist. So without further ado, put your hands together for Kat Cochrane.
Thanks, Tom.
I'm kind of getting used to these thrones. What do you feel about the seats, guys?
Taskmaster.
Taskmaster.
I'm getting a tremendous sense of power here. This is great.
It's like, you can't see anybody, so it's like, you know.
I find that is...
Normally, Edinburgh audiences are really sexy, and I can't really tell here, but if you see me stumbling around in the dark, don't kind of get alarmed.
So I thought maybe it would be worth just kind of maybe getting some insight from you, Irvine. I saw an amazing interview you did with Beth Rigby maybe a couple of months back. I was on holiday with the family and we were catching a rare bit of telly before the usual onslaught of child-based activities begins. And you were answering lots of different questions, but there was one remark you made in particular where you were kind of casting your eye back to the time when you were first getting started and how really publishing, writing and the marketplace, if you will, has changed. You know, we don't need to go into too much detail about Trainspotting. I know you'll be sick of talking about it, but you yourself said it would be very difficult even for a great book to get that sort of platform today, despite the fact that the machinery and software exists to have it everywhere. And I wonder if you could just elaborate on that. What is it that's changed over the last 20, 30 years?
I think the main thing is that we don't really have a culture now, a street culture. We have a media culture. Everything is on the internet, it's online. And, you know, I mean, I run a dance music label down in Brighton, and it's we get a lot of stuff from talented young musicians, basically. And it's people that are writing dance music, they're making dance music, they're producing it in their bedrooms. They've never actually danced. They've never been to a dance club, you know? So they miss out that kind of lived experience, that sort of vibe and that kind of, that soul, if you like, of having something that's kind of contested and it's out there and it's, whereas now, you know, you're in a kind of top-down sort of hierarchical thing. Now it's like the Instagram sort of influencer tells you what, you know, says what people like, and and people generally conform, they go along with that kind of thing. So it's kind of, I think the top down, the media culture that we have which was supposed to be about, the internet was supposed to be about setting us free, but you had the internet too, which was the kind of version of the enclosures internet, and it became much more about sort of harvesting our thoughts and our history and our data, and kind of controlling us and presenting us with algorithms of ourselves. So things are so much more controlled. So to have a book that's very much seen to be from a subculture and not from the dominant culture, it'd be very, very hard to get traction, to get that, to get people behind it in that way.
And obviously, with repeated success over the years comes a little bit more clout, and therefore I would imagine confidence on the part of the industry and whatever ideas you're bringing to the table. But I'd be curious to know as well if you've still, to this day, will pitch things or talk about things, and there's something lost in translation. The kind of the purveyors of the dominant culture are kind of like, what the fuck are you on about, big man? Whereas you're still kind of, I would imagine you're still plugged in some ways to the world that you came from.
Well, I think you find that I'm quite fortunate in publishing, because I am allowed to do what I want. I've got a very kind of rarefied place because I've managed to carve out my own kind of niche of what people expect. And I think in TV, particularly, not so, for them a bit intermediate, but in TV it's more difficult, because TV, you've got the notion of an audience, and you have to think of an audience. When you don't really think of an audience when you write books. You're just doing it for your own enjoyment, really. But I think with telly, it's like, you've got the producers have got a take on it. The streaming platforms or the broadcasters have all got kind of shareholders. In any controversy, the share price goes down. So the kind of basically the conservative sort of kind of shareholders and owners of the companies have these sort of kind of liberal kind of policemen in the next level down. So you have a kind of you have that whole double aspect in neoliberalism, the economic kind of thing that's off the table, and you can't talk about it because this is the way it is. And then there's a social liberalism, which is kind of more contested, basically. So you have these red lines that you know that that exist, and they're coming into publishing as well. But I mean, again, I'm fairly lucky that I've been able to escape most of them. But that's a temporal thing. It is like sort of. Because I was established in the 90s, I was established before the internet, before kind of this millennium, and Trainspotting becomes like, like Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon and all that. It becomes something that it's ossified in this sort of in this culture, in this media culture. So it just regurgitates every 5 years for another generation. Yeah?
And it's really interesting to think that era where things could become, as you say, ossified, could be over for most things, irrespective of the quality, because there's always something being lined up to come in the next Friday. Kat, could you talk us through, first of all, the recent book that you've published, and then also the reason that you chose to do it yourself? Because I think there's an overlap here between the two of you, in the sense that you had a kind of idea of how you wanted to present this book, and you came up against barriers because there's very strict, rigid ideas about how certain formats or forms should not blend. But that wasn't what your vision was, and you just did it yourself, didn't you?
I did, yeah. It was kind of. I mean, I'm kind of aware that I'm probably more like maybe people in the audience than Irvine, Whereas by wanting to kind of maybe having their first book out, or having a book that you're sitting on, or an idea that you're sitting on, and maybe going to a publisher and getting the knockbacks, or coming up with ideas, and you're just knockback after knockback, and then I don't know if Irvine, if the self-publishing had been out when you were doing Trainspotting, or when you were doing Filth or something, would you have taken that?
Definitely. I mean, I think I would have had to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would have just had to. I mean, I brought a book out with John King and Alan Warner on Friday, and we did it through John's London Books, which is a small independent. And it just felt great that you you know, you didn't have a lead-in time of 18 months to a year. You know,
Yeah,
we could basically write the stories, edit them, and knock them out. And it felt like, you know, when I first started to get into writing, and you know, that kind of fanzine culture that was around then, and it was great. It was great being able to do that. You know,
Right. Because I've often found, you know, like I self-published through Amazon, and I had sort of qualms about it because the whole Amazon thing doesn't always sit quite right, you know, with, you know, certain things that they do ethically and the tax thing and all the rest of it. So, but something that really set the idea in motion for me was last year I was at a poetry event in Edinburgh, funnily enough, and I'll not mention who it is, but who's somebody that's became quite a good friend, had a poetry book, good kind of bit of work, you know, very decent book. I've read it since then, and she'd been published by an independent publisher, and we got into the conversation of how she only get like £1 a copy, and the book was selling for a tenner, you know, and I was thinking, hang on a minute, you know, like only 10%, like, but the thing about it was that she was quite happy with this, and I was sitting there going, no, this can't be right. So I went away, and I've kind of, you know, that conversation in itself kind of like, I thought there has to be a better way to do this, so I looked at all the kind of ways to do it, and Amazon was probably the best one in terms of the easiness of it, you know. So kind of hooked up with, I'd finished my book, got it edited the, you know, like 10 times over, because if you're going to self-publish, you can't just put anything out there, you know, it has to be tight, it has to be edited to death, you know, not just by yourself, but by really, you know, qualified people or people that you know and trust and whatever. And then I did the maths, and I found out that I was getting a bit more through the ebook, a bit more through selling the paperback and the hardback. But of course, when you self-edit, it's a completely different ballgame, because you've put all the work in to get it there, and then you get your author copies, or it's available to sell. But then what happens, you've got to be your own marketer, you've got to be your own, like, seller, you know, you don't have that publishing house behind you or that agent or whatever, so you've got to kind of like be everything after that, and that's maybe when the hard work can come in, because, you know, if you love writing, it's like you write and you do it, and that's almost a pleasure, although it's hard work, but it's a pleasure. But when you're sort of like, all right, okay, I need to sell this thing if I want to pay the rent, or if I want to become a serious writer, or I want to, you know, so that's the journey that I'm on now, because the book called Sugartown, it's a book of short stories and poems, and it's all about Glasgow, basically. I grew up in East Kilbride, but I've been living in Glasgow for the last 15 years, and it's kind of about been sparked by conversations I've had in chippies and bookies and bus queues and things like that, and it's about the Glasgow sensibility, and it's about a very working class kind of place, and that's reflected all the way through. So, and my dream is like for that book to be in every single bookshelf of every single Glasgow, West of Scotland, you know, house, because like it's like you're saying, how do you get a book to be popular than another? How do you get somebody to buy your book? It's a wee bit like, how do you get somebody to come to your show and know the show down the road? That kind of thing. So it's a lot of hard work in the after publishing, when you do the self-publishing. It's good fun, because I sort of get it out there through doing poetry performances and spoken word and stuff like that. There's a really good community in Glasgow around that. So that helps. I take the books along, and it's like sell a few and all the rest that you get word of mouth and whatever.
And I guess it's a kind of solidarity as well when you're kind of part of a scene. I mean, I'm not as involved with the music scene as I used to be, and it's partly because my responsibilities have changed, partly because the group of friends that I grew up with, you know, we've all moved on to different places in our lives, so there's a nostalgic notion of what it would be like if we all got together, and then there's reality where we're just talking about our health problems. And me and my wife are moaning about the child rearing responsibilities and all of that sort of stuff. But there is a brilliant time when you are plugged into a scene. And that's really, it's weird, because at the time it feels like a grind, and at the time you don't realise it. But when you cast your mind back, this has been my experience, after having achieved a goal you set yourself, it's those days you remember the most. It's like the memory of going to school. You never appreciated it at the time. You never appreciated all the cunts that you were in classes with and all the BAMs. and the teacher that said about you and all these things. But these are memories I can recall so vividly now because they are just seared in there.
Just think of it as the good old days.
Aye, and it's because of the connections that are being made, but you don't realise the significance of it till later when maybe there's less of those connections because you have professionalised what you're doing, and so it's a crazy journey. I'm interested to kind of touch perhaps on technology. The spectre of artificial intelligence looms large over everything. I don't know what your experience or understanding of it's been, but you'll have heard it talked about, you'll have read about it yourselves, no doubt. I was using ChatGPT to tell my children customised bedtime stories. So I would instruct it to come up with like a 10-minute story that contained the names Daniel and Lily, and different themes, you know, sometimes funny, sometimes heartfelt or whatever. And how quickly it was able to do that, that was the thing that sort of worried me. But that's something that's coming down the pike for a lot of us at some stage. The technological difference that we're dealing with now, and I guess this is something about the kind of dichotomy between the two of you, is that how we hear about how other people are receiving our work, or how we gauge where things are sitting culturally, is all being mediated through social media giants, the mechanics of which are underpinned by different incentives. And so it's difficult sometimes really to kind of, you can think that you're in touch with culture, but you're in touch with a version of culture that the software's trying to predict is going to get you engaged. And I wonder, how involved with that do you get, Irvine? Do you try to second guess yourself based on what you see in social media?
Well, I mean, I kind of, I really use social media. I mean, I'm only on Twitter and Instagram, and I bung out pictures on Instagram, and I'll say anything on Twitter just to get kind of followers, basically, so I can ram a leaflet into their hand, you know, about what I'm doing next, like, you know. So I thought about an instrumental way. I don't really engage in any kind of meaningful way with it. So I'm pretty much in my own wee world of what I do, but. You know, I'm kind of interfaced with it directly now because I'm actually, you know, I'm a member of the Writers Guild in America because I lived in America for 10 years basically and worked in Hollywood, and we're on strike just now. And what this is actually such a really interesting strike because it is basically about that. It's about what the intellectual property is and who owns it and when it's, you know, and will we be replaced with artificial intelligence? And also simultaneously you have the dumbing down of culture so that people will just, you know, people are basically operating as robots now. You know, we're recycling old stuff, but, you know, so the robots are just faster, basically, like, you know, and. But again, it's what I was talking about, the human element. There is still a human element because right now, machines don't change when somebody comes into the room. You know what I mean? They kind of, or when another machine comes into the room. But they are working on it. Now they've got one that they've taught one artificial intelligence machine to lie, which doesn't sound like a really great idea, like, no. You know what I mean? But yeah, so I mean, they've done that now, and we are all kind of sort of techno serfs, basically. You know, we're serving the big clouds of, you know, the Chinese and the American clouds, one or the other, basically, and that's the sort of new Cold War, and you know, the degrees of freedom that we have. Not just as artists, but as citizens, in terms of the prescription of our behaviour, is kind of becomes sort of more and more contracted, I think, every year.
There's that kind of weird blend where there's the kind of Orwellian monitoring of our behaviour with the sort of Brave New World. It's so convenient that we kind of welcome it, you know, or we can kind of turn a blind eye to it. Maybe we don't understand how serious it is. Now, when we started college, this would have been the year just before the referendum, so it was a lot of activism, a lot of campaign, just blogs coming out every hole, and it was a very, very busy time. And I remember having watched you using technology, and you had a blog, and it was from you I got the idea to start a blog. So I thought, hang on, this is cool. So I can just start publishing what I think on my own thing. I don't have to get somebody's permission to do that. And that's when I started to find an audience for my other writing, because I had been a hip hop artist. But that was the golden age of Facebook before the referendum results, depending on what way you voted and what algorithm echo chamber you were in. It wasn't really until, you know, late September 2014 when I started going like that. Hang on a minute. I was sure the whole world was one way. I was sure everybody in this country was one way. I've had a bit of a rude awakening, and it started to dawn on me. Then we had Brexit, same thing again. And so there's this kind of poison chalice aspect to social media, because it has levelled the playing field in some ways. It puts power into the hands of creators, at least in the first instance of just being creative. The technology facilitates creativity, and then we have mechanisms by which we can publish it, engage feedback. But then there are other questions around, you know, the other content that we see, the other influences, the advertising model of social media, which incentivizes sometimes not always the most virtuous traits. And I wonder how you've navigated some of that, Kat, because it seems like you've used a lot of this technology to your advantage, but there will be negative sides to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, even the word blog, I feel quite nostalgic for the word blog, do you know what I mean? It's a wee bit like MySpace or Tumblr.
Or DVD.
Totally, it's along those lines. And you're kind of like, God, that's that. I mean, it's 10 years ago, but a lot can happen in 10 years with the way the world is now. I mean, when I had my blog, it was kind of like, I put everything on there, you know, it was kind of like a kind of soundings, you know, it was kind of like, oh, what did I write last night? I need to read my blog again to remember. And then I felt going into journalism, I needed to have a blog, you know. But nowadays, if you're going into anything, any creative industry, you need to have your, you know, 20,000 followers on Instagram. You need to have your 20,000, you know, plus followers on Twitter. And you're kind of wondering, you know, like when you're trying to build that amount of folks, I know you know, you've got quite a following, but you sort of wonder how many people are actually engaging with what you're saying. So, you know, is that, it's a, you know, like what's the reach, you know, because obviously if you have a lot of people following you, you can wake up in the morning and go, I feel quite good about this, do you know what I mean? But what does it really mean? So it's kind of like that way, like you say, like I've been on Twitter before, and I'm not really on Twitter. I think I follow about 6 people, and 6 people follow me. I'm more like Instagram sort of thing, 'cause I'm more like kind of photographs and more like wee kind of bits that I like that better. But I do remember, to answer your question, when I was doing my Dearest Scotland project, which was a project that I did in 2014, where we went around Scotland to ask people what they thought the future of Scotland might be, and we used Twitter for that. And I just thought, oh my God, this is brutal. This is absolutely brutal. Like, you know, the kind of things that people were sending you, and that was like back in the day, and it's 10 times worse now. And this was just a project that was kind of like for the future of Scotland, but I was like, the abuse is already, you know, like giving me sleepless nights, and this is just something, you know, I'm not really doing anything controversial sort of thing.
These were the cracks that were shown around the constitutional issue, but it was like every single issue became a symbol of that, didn't it?
I noticed it was affecting my mental health, so I had to go to Twitter, you know, when I just have it for that. But like, it's difficult because you do want to still, I mean, we're probably that age where you're like, you don't want to be in that all the time, you don't want, you know, you want to sort of like have conversations, and you want to meet people, and you want to sort of build whatever you're trying to build, or get your word out or whatever. But it is what it is, and you have to engage with it, and people engage with you, because obviously that's the only way that people maybe think that they can engage with you, or can have a piece of you, you know. And I'm not really big into that. I like, you know, I want to just be a writer, but I know I have to have that step of like being on Instagram, being on Twitter, you know, like having so many like posts a day, or kind of like, I remember I used to, what was it, the Twitter board app, where it's kind of like you'd post things or you'd schedule them and stuff like that, you know. And I was like, oh man, oh, I don't know, you know, and it's like I've tried to refrain from it. So it's difficult, it is really, really difficult, because we're living in reality where if you're a writer, you're trying to sell books, you're trying to sell your name, you're trying to do this, trying to do that. And you need that, you know, because I mean, if you say to a 20-year-old nowadays, I'm not on social media, I think you're like, you know what I mean, like what you're about, you know, it's like, so it's difficult to just find that balance of living in the real world but also using that as your, especially if you've done like what I've done, the self-publishing bit, because I'm sure like if you're with a big publisher, they do a lot of that stuff for you, you know.
Aye, well, I was going to, but actually that brings me nicely kind of what I wanted to get back into the real world with it, and talk about the environment that we do most of our work in, right? Because it's very important, obviously, to have the right sort of space to be creative and have the right kind of run-in as well, you know. So I remember before lockdown, the nightmare of that, I would go away somewhere for maybe 3 or 4 days, because I would need a day to give myself permission to just focus on writing. I wasn't able to just kind of jump in, do something, jump back out. And I always like that kind of, I like the sort of James Kilman way of doing it, where he gets up early in the morning and he only needs to do 2 or 3 hours, and then he feels that he's made contact with the work and he can just get on with his day. But then once you have children and then there's a pandemic, all of that goes out of the window. So my second book was really like a real struggle, a sentence, a paragraph, just making contact with it once a day, whatever I could do. But in an ideal scenario, and I'll start with you, Irvine, what is your process in terms of what kind of space do you like to write in? How do you like to write? Is there a specific way of doing it, or does it change?
I like to try to, I mean, everyone has been, everything I've written, I mean, I've written about, I don't know how many books now, but everyone has been slightly different. I think the fun is kind of reinventing the process to fit with the kind of thing you're trying to write in a lot of ways. I mean, some ones have been, up in the, usually I prefer to get up in the morning and do it early when there's no distractions. Sometimes I'll write through the night though, and what I did find when I kind of started to make money, I had this idea about what a writer would be and all the things that could make me a better writer. And I remember I basically bought this big fucking mansion, and I'm going to have this big writer's suite, I'm going to have all these books on the walls, I'm going to have a balcony, and kind of had this in Chicago, and I had this big table that people could come around and we could meet and we could talk, and I had the big screen so I could watch the DVDs of the shows and all that I was going to be writing on or stuff. And I had a gym downstairs, a big kitted out gym, and I had a cinema room and all that. And I never, every time you get to that point, or you're sitting down, you think, you're in the gym, you think, this is great, this is good, but I should actually be working. So you go and you work and you think, God, I've got a fucking big cinema down there, I never use it. So you go to the cinema, and then you get fed up with that, and you think yourself, I'm in this mad, I've created this fucking bizarre mausoleum for myself, and there's a beautiful art house cinema just around the corner from me, so I would go there and watch movies, and I enjoyed sitting in the cinema with other people and buying my ticket and all that. And I enjoy, I had this big writing suite. I would be scrunched up I'd be scrunched up in the corner of this cafe, and people would be coming and going. And I love writing like that. I have to be outside, and I have to have a bit of chaos around me. When I'm putting it together, I have to be quiet. And then there was, there's like the gym. There's a great gym around the corner. I'd do much more when I went there if I just sitting on my own and all that. And I realised that you don't need all that stuff. It's just rubbish. You want to get out, and you get so much of your ideas and enthusiasm for just being engaged with things that are going on around you, rather than locking yourself away. So I don't. So I've stopped all this kind of big houses nonsense. I'm happy in a small place now, with just one room to write in, quite a Spartan room. And then I can sort of take it outside. But yeah, as times and regimes go, I just change it all the time.
Well, that's kind of encouraging in a way. Do you know what I mean? To think that even when you have a level of resource at your disposal to create what you think is the perfect environment, it's just still that grass is always greener thing. Yeah. Oh, I've got that now. Back round to the shite gym, back to the cinema, even though I've got a cinema. You know what I mean? And that really there is that need to be around people.
You need excuses not to write, basically, as well. And the more you have everything supposedly optimum, the more you take that away from yourself. But you are energized by people being around you, I think.
What about you? Have you got a kind of... Because I remember you just being able to get super focused back in college in a way that I really did envy. You had kind of tunnel vision when the moment called for it. whereas I would kind of shit the bed a wee bit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And just disappear for a couple of months, you know, and reappear with another item in my criminal record.
Brown scants.
Yeah. So but there is a kind of focus, and I guess that is a sort of natural ability that you've got. But is there a ideal setting or scenario? What do you need in order to support your creative process?
Can I tell you, it's definitely not as celebrated as Irvine's like. I go to the Mitchell Library because I'm inspired by that mad funky carpet. I don't know if anybody here's been to the Mitchell Library.
Upstairs.
And it's upstairs. It's like being on
acid. It's
acid.
a great place to write.
Aye, that's where I go when I'm because I have 2 bedrooms at home, and during COVID my partner had to use the end bedroom where I would write. And then I was like, oh, this isn't working. I can't do it in the living room, you know. And it's like doors going and the neighbours and all that. So I take myself to the Mitchell Library, and I still do that. And it's a room where it's like complete silence, and you very rarely get libraries nowadays where it's complete silence, because they've got activities on and they've got all sorts going on, cafes and all that. But in there, it's like you can hear a pin drop, and if somebody sneezes, they turn round and it's like, shh, you know what I mean? Because it's that sort of place. So I go there and I sort of tune in to just that building, and I like to walk around it maybe and have a nice lunch and stuff like that. And then I'll do like a good shift in there kind of way. That's my favourite place.
It's interesting you talk about libraries, as you say, and this is, it's obviously contextualised why libraries are becoming community centres and drop-in centres, and it's because public services are being run down in a long, drawn-out process of managed decline, where in order to justify their existence and increase footfall, the library has to become everything to everyone, which undermines the fundamental purpose of a library, which is to provide a place where you can sit down and hear yourself think without having to spend £5 for a cup of coffee. And people who are quite happy and content to see that demise of the library, these are people who tend not to know what it's like to live in a paper-thin block of flats where you can hear a couple arguing above you, you can hear a drug deal going on next door, a couple of newborn twins there, and God knows what the fuck's going on down the stairs. And so actually in some communities the library is the only place where it's quiet enough for you to contemplate anything other than, I fucking hate living here, you know? And so when we see that this, I would call it an attack on libraries. I know that the leader of Glasgow City Council and all the other local authorities would have a very persuasive explanation for why the library is being left in the state that it's in. But what do you think the impact would be on people from our kind of background trying to get into the sort of game that we're in, whatever level we're at, when the whole concept of a library itself is no longer as fundamental to the community experience as it was certainly when I was a kid?
Yeah, man, as I said, I do like chaos around me, but there comes a point when you need silence, you need to be able to concentrate, you need quiet. And but, it's like we had, when I was growing up in Muirhouse in the scheme, we had the library there, and it was just such a haven. It was a place that you could just sit, and you kind of, when you're a wee kid, you kind of got a bit pissed off getting told off all the time for making a noise and all that. But when I got to a point where I really wanted to read and concentrate on what I was doing, I really wanted to write, there were such great places, and you really valued that silence. And I think it's like, it's a really good point that you've made, that you don't have that place of refuge. If you're in a small council flat, you can't even have books, basically, because you can't, the shelves, if you try to put shelves up, the wall would come down and you'd be kind of, you have knocked 2 flats into one almost. And I think, because I had this notion that once I made money as a writer, I would have a place that would be stuffed with books, would be big shelves and all that kind of stuff. And I do, in my flat here and then my flat in London, I really do appreciate having that. I appreciate having a sort of shelving all over the place, nice shelving, and the books on display, and kind of I can get to them easy. I can get to these reference books easy, and that's a kind of that's because I've made a bit of money, and I'm fortunate and lucky to be able to replicate the library, if you like, the experience of the library at home. But initially, when I'm getting ideas together, and I'm just banging anything down. That's what I do. I write until I get 20,000 words. Basically, I don't look at anything, and then I'll pick out the themes and the characters from that. And then I've got to have that noise. I've got to have that chaos around me. I've got to have people kind of shouting and sort of, and sort of, you just have that sort of. Sometimes I write on the tube in London, I write on the Circle Line, I'll go around twice, basically, and that's kind of 4 hours. It's great, it means you do a 4-hour shift. If you go around twice, you've done this kind of basic, 3.5, 4 hour shift, and you've got all these descriptions of people, if you're struggling for a description of a character, you just look at somebody across there and say, she had dark hair, more a white overcoat. I'm crap at all that kind of stuff, so it's just great. You've got them all there, and
And I guess, just to kind of go back to the library thing, one of the difficulties I was struggling with when I was writing my first book was that I was finding myself getting resentful of the other members of the community who were using the libraries for different reasons, because they were there and it was very noisy. There was no thought put into, okay, so if this is a mother and toddler group, or this is a drop-in centre for people who are getting advice for X, Y, and Z, and these are all people that I would advocate for and defend in the public realm on an instinctive basis. And then I find myself in the library like, fucking shut the fuck up. Do you know what I mean? I'm trying to fucking write a fucking book. I don't know what I'm doing. And I guess that's kind of part of the hustle and bustle of life now, where we're forced into these increasingly smaller spaces, where what we actually want to use those spaces for are the proper spaces that we might need to do all those different things. It seems like our leaders aren't there. It's like they don't give a fuck. Maybe they've all got libraries in their home. Maybe they've all got nannies looking after their kids. I don't know. Would you find yourself in the absence of a haven like the Mitchell Library? You would have to go to fucking Starbucks or something, wouldn't you?
And I hate no, I just couldn't. I just couldn't. But kind of echoing what Irvine was saying about being a child, when I was a teenager, I knew that I was like the only creative person in my family, and that can be a bit of a challenge, because like it's like, oh, she just get fancy ideas, she wants to be a writer, there was nobody really, like my mum, my dad, my brother, my cousins, my aunties, nobody was, so I would go to the library in the Westwood in East Kilbride as a refuge, to surrounded by books where I could feel that it's all right to want to be a bit artistic or a bit creative, and that was a place where it was still very much part of the community, but it was very much a library in the sense of it's a quiet place. And then you would go and you would get your wee, remember in the days when you get your wee paper tickets and they'd put the wee thing in, and they were always like kind of different colours and all that. And it's a wee bit nostalgic, but that was a big thing for me, definitely. And obviously, because there isn't a place nowadays for the mothers and toddlers group, or the, whatever that is, then everybody's kind of chucked in. So it's a kind of thing where that's no right, but there's something other going on, because it's like noise on top of silence. That doesn't equate, so somebody's made that decision within power to,
and it's a normalisation of that. It's not like, look, it's shit just now,
if you're a certain age,
on creating a
that's
new
normal
space.
now.
It's just everybody has to adjust to it. I mean, I remember running youth clubs in these places, so I see it through all the different angles. But just it is kind of worrying, because what does it say about the potential of people to ascend into culture, to then become an example to other people from their kind of background that this is a possibility? How do we produce role models of the future when that vital mechanism of social mobility is being undermined to the extent that it is? Now, I'm just checking my watch. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw it open to you guys. I kind of hogged it yesterday a wee bit, so there was only 10 minutes of questions, and I regretted it after, because the audience, to be honest, did ask some questions that were far more insightful than anything that I could come up with. So tonight I'm just going to open it right up at 1:15 and hand over to you. You can indicate your desire to speak in the usual way by just raising your hand, and then someone will approach you with a roving microphone. And if you could keep your question to a question, we're not looking for a statement to the United Nations or anything like that, okay? And make sure it's a good question. Do you know what I mean? Because nobody wants to hear your stupid wee daft question.
I want to hear your daft question.
We've got always gentlemen. One here. I'm nervous actually even to attach a gender because you're silhouetted by the light. So I'll just say there's a person there.
Hey, it's Rob. Irvine, sorry, a question for you. Just wondering, how do you find the difference between your films that have been portrayed and the TV series you're doing currently?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've probably got it depends. If you're doing a film for a studio, you're probably a bit more prescribed because you're working for a corporation, really. If you're doing an independent film, it depends on the producers and the financiers and all that, what the relationship you have with them. TV's much more kind of, it's much more a kind of sort of corporate concern. They know how to make TV programs. The streaming platform or the broadcaster they have I think you have this incredible freedom when you write a book, and you have a lot less freedom when you do a movie, and probably quite a bit less freedom again when you do TV, because you've got all these issues about target audiences and the watershed and all that kind of stuff. There's all these red lines about representation and language and kind of so TV can be it's interesting. It's just a very, very different process. It's like writing a book and writing a TV show, or even adapting a TV show from a book. They're just such kind of chalk and cheese type of things.
Thanks for your question. And by the way, I was only being facetious when I said no one wants to hear your stupid wee question. All right? I mean, even a less than brilliant question is still going to be a vital contribution to the discourse. Got another one over here.
Hi there. You mentioned earlier about the onslaught of AI. How confident, and you've all three of you mentioned that human approach and that. Irvine mentioned about the soul, and you talked about the conversations you had, Kat, and how you built your stories around. How confident are you that the humanist approach to consciousness can stand and withstand AI in the future and coming up in all forms of the written word?
I think it's really difficult to answer that question. I think it would be good to answer that question because then it means that we as humans would have a bit of a handle on it. But it's as if it's all running out of control as far as I can see. Do you know what I mean? It's like I feel like in the last year, you pick up a newspaper, or who picks up a newspaper anymore? I wish you folks still did. Or you read something online, and in the top 3 headlines is something to do with AI, and it's to do with films, or it's to do with the Chinese or the Russians or whatever. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, we need to know more about it, but we need to kind of find like that information other than the headlines that have been driven at us, I think, because it will affect all of us, and I think in this time next year, there might be something that will explode through it, and we don't see it coming, but so we need to kind of intelligise ourselves around it.
Has anybody heard of a film called Accelerate or Die by Jake Chapman, the artist? It's a really, really good film. It's like it's about everything about the end of capitalism and AI and all this kind of stuff. But one thing that somebody was quite interesting, they said that we kind of tend to sort of embody kind of human values as good, and kind of robotics as kind of bad, and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, it's human beings that are that are programming the AI machines to lie and all that, and they're kind of making them into their own image. So maybe if AI machines and robots became sentient, it would be an improvement on humans. Maybe it is the next kind of stage in evolution. So we shouldn't get kind of, when you think about sort of, racism, imperialism, greed, exploitation and all that, we shouldn't really sort of, maybe we should be a bit sort of cagey about holding up humanism as something to sort of, to be aspirational towards and defensive about.
Yeah, I think that I agree with, we need to have a bit of humility about our own natures and the ultimate value of that. But obviously the best of us at any given time is important to try and retain that. For me, when I look at AI, I watched one of a very long form discussion in US Congress about it. It was just a bunch of people who were all in the AI game, bringing to Congress all of the threat modelling that they had done, including a demonstration where the guy it was an AI of him talking to the politicians, because he was demonstrating that it was like for like, you know. And so I think one of the ways that it becomes normalised is there are amazing humorous things that it can do, you know, like country singers rapping NWA, and the N-word is replaced by the sound of like cowboy pistols, and it's novelty, and you're like, oh, that's hilarious, you know what I mean? Biggie Smalls rapping Tupac lyrics that are about him, and they're both dead from gun violence. and so it becomes normalised and it permeates in that way. I'm less concerned about the impact it has on creatives, because I think sometimes some of the things that we think are creativity is actually just labour. You know what I mean? Editing, punctuation, grammar, all that shit, that's not creativity half the time. A lot of the time that's just hard labour. There are creative things you can do with it, and once you master those things you can be creative. But does a message have any less value because I sent it to you through an electronic programme rather than wrote it down on a piece of paper and walked 400 miles and delivered it to you myself? Do you know what I mean? So some of the arguments against it are kind of missing the point that it can take a lot of hard work out of it. But it's the escalation. It's the same with nuclear weapons. It's the same idea. One country gets it, develops it. This forces the other countries to develop it as well, because they're like, well, they're going to have an advantage. And so it's just this kind of game theory, tit for tat. The thing with AI, though, is there's a point where it can become self-aware, and then it just starts making its own autonomous decisions, and that is, quite frankly, fucking terrifying. You know what I mean? Not to put the shits up, y'all.
I've got a story in my book, funnily enough, called The Sex Bots Are Coming, The Sex Bots Are Coming, which is a kind of pun on the movie The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming. And basically it's a wee Glasgow guy that wakes up in this kind of laboratory in Japan, in Tokyo, and his soul is entered into the sort of realm of a very sexy sex bot kind of thing. And he's been programmed to say, you know, to his client, to the guy that buys her, you know, oh, you're so sexy, oh, you're so this, you're so that. But I've got this sort of like, in brackets, for fuck's sake, is this what it's going to be like in the future? Do you know what I mean? And it's because I'm a big fan of Black Mirror, and I just wanted to do a wee bit around that. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's kind of like I kind of wanted to do this thing around, you know, it's like it's everywhere. And I think the thing about like AI sex bots is quite interesting, because where's that going to go? But this, you know, like the wee Glasgow guy is like our kind of conscious going, oh, this is too far, like, you know, it's like I've got to do this, you know, this is the power that this I've got as a sex bot. No, I'm going to rein this back a wee bit, you know what I mean? So maybe as a humankind we need to rein it back, but how we do that I don't know, because it's already kind of out of control.
We're making, we're trying to make kind of robots kind of more human, but we're trying to make humans more robotic as well through all the processes that we're going through. If you look at if you look at like, I was researching this book, this novella that I'd written about teenagers that were addicted to gaming and addicted to hardcore pornography and all that. And you think then it's quite kind of horrendous that somebody's sexuality can be sort of kind of determined by sort of watching hardcore pornography, you know, watching really exploitative hardcore pornography, and you think, just the mechanics of watching a 2D image and then having a real 3D person, you know, and you know, now they're talking about teenagers having erectile dysfunction and all this kind of stuff. So it's like, so there's a sort of there's a kind of automation of the human spirit that's going on with the technology as well, you know. So it's maybe kind of in the whole dumbing down culture, it's kind of artificial stupidity that's as kind of as scary as artificial intelligence in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there definitely are parallels. We have time for another question. I'll come to you, right? I'll come to you in a minute, right?
It's nice to see it, because see before the questions, couldn't see anybody. It's nice to just see talking about AI but human faces.
I don't think I would have needed a microphone. Because
we're recording the audio, so for the people listening to the podcast later on, it's for their benefit.
Do any of the three of you feel the responsibility to be role models, and what would that look like?
I mean, I don't know. I think it's kind of grandiose to announce yourself as a role model. But if you do get out and about and you get a sense that people are watching you and taking influence from some of the things that you've said or some of the changes that you've made in your life, I mean, I'm thinking specifically about my journey in recovery and in sobriety over the last 10 years. That's probably when people say, do you hope that your work changes the world, or have you noticed the impact of your work? And they're expecting me to say, aye, Rishi Sunak read my book and then he was like, get wee darling and he'll sort it out. Do you know what I mean? When actually it's the messages I get every week from people who say they went to their first recovery meeting off the back of a documentary that they watched, or they told somebody that they're close to that they think that they're struggling. There are people who I've met through social media and my work who I've helped in recovery, and they've gone on to achieve string more years of sobriety together than I was able to string together. So I would say in terms of a tangible impact that I could actually like measure, then that's the sort of impact that I've had. Whether that makes me a role model, I don't know, because at the end of the day I've also got to live my life, and I think that can be a dangerous road to go down when you begin to think of yourself as that. Because I mean it's kind of, it becomes a sort of a form of self-indulgence and self-importance. For me, that's a very dangerous thing, personally speaking.
I had a lovely experience before COVID started. It was in January 2020 where I'd been asked to be a judge in a short story competition, and it was South Lanarkshire schools, and because I'd went to South Lanarkshire schools, some of the students who had wrote a story was the school that I went to, kind of thing, and in the area. And there was myself and a retired teacher, and we get 10 stories each, I think it was 10 or 12 stories each. And then there was some that was like, you know, they've just kind of been pushed into it with their teacher. There was another one that was like, oh my God, it was like, this has been plagiarised. And I thought, oh no, you know, I need to tell the teacher about this and whatever. And then there was one that was absolutely stunning. It was like the best thing I've read, and it was like a 15-year-old lassie, and it was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. And the thing about it is that we decided that she was the winner, but then COVID struck and we never actually got to present the thing. So to answer your question about role models, I think I would rather maybe be like a mentor for like a little diamond in the rough, because I remember doing competitions like that at school, and if somebody kind of came and said, oh listen, you've got a wee bit of talent there, I'll take you aside and do something like that. So I would rather sort of find the 14-year-old me, if that makes sense, rather than, you know, like that kind of thing, and go, right, no, you can do it. I always think talent will out, you know, and I thought that with this story, this lassie, and it was a shame that I never got to meet her, but that's the kind of, you know, mentor rather than role model, yeah.
I'm not a role model.
Okay, right, there was one final person over here that I seen who I was keen to bring in because it's been quite a male-dominated event. Over here, there we go, just along. Make sure that mic gets to you.
Hi, so all three of you write in working class voices, but how important is it, you know, when you're defining your audience? I mean, we're in a fringe venue, it's all very middle class. Irvine, you know, Trainspotting's on at the Fringe, it's very kind of middle class. They might think Trainspotting's comical in a way, which it is, but does it bother you that the people that it's talking about aren't receiving it? Or are they receiving it?
Yeah, they are receiving it, maybe receiving it in different ways. They're maybe not paying sort of big sums of money on theatre tickets in the Fringe, but you know, maybe they're reading the books or they're watching the films, and it's one of these things. It's, you know, it's an inevitable kind of process. It's like when you know, my first book, you know, when it sold 10,000 copies, I was like a local hero. You know, all my mates, everybody was saying, oh, he's representing our lives, well done, you know. And then when it sold 100,000 copies, it was like, fucking money there, eh? And then, you know, and then it's like 1 million copies. It was like, he's fucking sold us in the river, he's fucking a cunt, you know. And it's like the book never changes, you know what I mean? It just kind of, there's not one word that's been changed in that, you know, but it just picks up different audiences, and it went national, then it went global, and it's like, and you know, and people that are invested in this, and they feel an ownership to it, you know, they feel a kind of ownership to that book, and it's their way of life and stuff like that, and it's their culture, it's their communities. And they feel it's been taken away from them. The bigger it gets, the more it flies into capitalism, basically. It flies into this market. And it is, you know, it's been taken away. And I feel as if it's been taken away from me too, you know what I mean? But, you know, and writing the book is an act of giving away, so it's not as bad for me as it is for people who are kind of into that thing. So it is, I mean, anything that's successful takes it further afield and more mainstream from where it's at. And it is, you know, we'll be doing Trainspotting as a musical next year, and we're going to start in the West End of London, and that's quite a, you know, we'll have discounted tickets for kind of coach parties from Essex coming in and all that sort of stuff, but it's still an issue that people are having to pay these huge prices to see it, to have an experience like that. And the Edinburgh Festival has been like that since time began, and it's really very hard now for anybody to put on a show. It's really expensive to put on a show, and it's not the, you know, it was never this big kind of democratic thing that was always touted to be, but it becomes less and less and less like that now. But again, you know, it's like the festival and all these aspects of art and culture, they're emblematic of what's going on in the world, you know, in general. They're emblematic of the destruction of the working classes and the middle class, and the concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer hands, the concentration of the corporate wealth, the whole kind of idea of cloud wealth now supplanting capitalism, like the techno-feudalist empire supplanting capitalism, and the capitalism class is a kind of vassal class, kind of in between that and exploiting the exploitation of the citizens. So all these things are happening in the world, and they're happening apace, and we're all part of it. But as you said just now, Darren, we've all got to lead our lives. We've all got to live our lives in this world, you know. And it's like you're constantly making a trade-off between trying to live the best life that you possibly can for yourself and the people around you that you've got responsibilities for, but also trying to have some kind of broader responsibility to a community in general, you know, and to see where all that's going, yeah.
I think that's a nice place to leave it. Thanks for your question. I could have chewed over that one for hours, but we'll leave it there. I just want to say before we go, I've indicated to you both privately, you know, my gratitude for your kindness and generosity at different points in my life and in my work, but I just want to kind of publicly say that as well, you know. It's a real privilege for me to have you here just in your own right as creators, but also there's a sentimentality to it as well, just because I have vivid memories at different points of you showing me time, showing me compassion, showing me a wee bit of love that really did set me on a certain kind of trajectory at different points. So thank you very much for that. The final thing that I just want to say is, if you've enjoyed the spirit of this event, the format of the event, the wisdom, insight, humour of this event, there's a few other of these events happening until Saturday, so you can pick up tickets on your way out of the door. If you don't want to do that, I mean, the woman has indicated there that you're all middle class apparently, so I see no reason why you can't, to be honest.
There's somebody I know that definitely isn't.
No, I know. It's just because I think she thinks that they'll all be fucking rabid, you know what I mean? There can't be working class people here, everyone's nice and polite. But if you do want to come to some of the other shows, then feel free just to get tickets. If not, thank you for coming to this show. Very, very grateful. I've been Darren McGarvey. This has been Common People. Enjoy the rest of your Fringe. Thank you very much.